All right, since it's time for our visitors to stop causing disturbances in the classroom, welcome everyone. Back to another exciting lesson.
Are you on uni?
I am, just did. Another exciting lesson on the nature of God. Have you ever called on a person who's visiting from another state who doesn't know he's going to get called on? Abraham, would you lead us in an opening prayer?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this day you have given us. Help us to love you more, and love others more, and know we can't make it through this life without you. Lord, you are gracious and merciful and always patient for us. Thank you for guiding us with your loving hand through our life. Please watch over us in our study this morning as we learn more about you and learn more about how we can apply it to our lives and share it with others this week. Please be with us in our travels and our worship today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. That was the third time I think I've heard Abraham speak, and so I knew he could talk, so that was good. And appreciate you doing that on short notice. All right, so a couple of things as we begin to the lesson number 3. Remember, we skipped over lesson number 2 because Dan was out of town last week, and we did lesson number 3. I got some feedback, and the feedback was kind of a little bit confused because we'd had some conversation in the class that was kind of a back and forth conversation, and it was leading to some people going, wait a minute, what's going on with this back and forth? So Norm and I have had a chance to talk, and we're kind of working on our stuff that he and I have some questions about together, and he and I are going to be doing that. In this class, we're going to more cover what we've talked about here, and then he and I are going to do some online classes to kind of get more in depth into some of the things. So, so as we got to last week, we got to we were on page 24 and 25 when we got to the nature of God, on God as a creator. His nature, his part of him is a creator. And how do we know that? Because we were told that he was a creator, right? That's one place. But how else, if you didn't read Genesis 1, how else could you know that he was a creator? Ready? You should know something about him. There's some group out there. So this is where intelligent design came from. Intelligent design as a movement said, if we cannot prove from the Bible to somebody, hey, look, atheist people, look what the Bible says. They look at you and go, I don't care what the Bible says. But if we can point to the design in nature and say, look at this design in nature, where does that come from? If there's intelligence in the design, there must have been an intelligent designer. Well, that's all intelligent design can say. The only thing intelligent design can prove is where there is design, there must be a designer. That's what intelligent design says. We as in people who believe in intelligent design, get saddled with a moniker, you're just Christians trying to do creationism. We got to be careful, and this is why I'm bringing it up. If you're talking to your neighbor and you say intelligent design proves that God of the Bible did this, that step, it's going to be hard to prove with the idea of intelligent design. The Bible teaches that God is the intelligent designer, but intelligent design just shows if there's design, there must, and the only presently, we talked about this last week a little bit, but Darwin believed that you can only use presently acting types of causes to explain things that have happened in the distant past. You can't invent a new cause. Well, back there was a genie that popped up and did it. Well, you can't do that. You must use presently acting causes. So therefore, we're using the only presently acting cause that we know of that causes design. The only thing that does that is an intelligent mind. So there must have been an intelligent mind that designed the cosmos, life as we know it. All right, so Romans 20 is right where Randy was going, is since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen. It's not that it was hidden. Yes, Norm?
You were saying, what were you saying? Cause? They're looking for a natural cause.
They're looking for a natural cause, and we're,
Not supernatural.
well, the only cause that we know of to design something in the natural world is intelligence. The only presently acting, not supernatural, the only presently acting cause.
What I'm saying is the evolutionists are only looking for a natural cause.
Right. And this is a natural cause. The only natural cause of design in the natural world that we can see, the only one is intelligence, an intelligent designer. And we should have been able to clearly see this attribute of God by looking around at the world that has been made. And so we're studying about the maker, but in intelligent design, it just says there is a maker. There is something. For every house is built by someone. You look at a house and you say, somebody built the house. But he who built all things is God. So when we see a house that's built, we know there was a builder. When we see the cosmos, the way it looks, the way it, even the atheists believe, well, there's an appearance of design, they say. Well, it's an appearance of design because there was a designer. It looks designed because it was designed. That's our view, and they'll try to come up with ways to not have to believe that. But God tells us through the Word, and we're here doing a Bible study about the nature of God, and so we're seeing places in the Bible where we should be able to look at that and say, aha, we should have had the intelligent design argument. We did have the intelligent design argument long before the intelligent design movement in the 1990s got going. So, Darwin believed that that presently acting cause must be existing to explain the distant past and what's the only known cause of information. The only known cause is an intelligent mind. So, as we go past this, now we're on to pages 25, 26, we get to the end of this chapter, and I wanted to take a second and go back one more into Genesis, where it says, what's the difference between man and animals? Because evolutionists and atheists and other folks believe that man is just one of the animals, right? We've just kind of come along and expanded our horizons. Okay, we got a little more brain matter than some, but we're just one of the animals. What's the difference between us and the animals? Maddie? We're made in the image. That is the only difference that I can see. Well, not the only difference, but that is told to us by God as to one of the differences. So we should be, as Christians, we should be able to point to differences between us and the animals, and if there are differences, be able to say, aha, there must have been a designer that designed us in his image. So humans are not animals. What are some of those differences? So I just thought of a couple, and I was going to let you guys think of a couple as well. Humans create art. Are there any animals that create art? Well, there actually are. I found out there's elephants that are given a paintbrush and told, dip it in here and smack that on the thing, and some of that art is better than some of the modern impressionists that I've seen. But does the animal really do art? No. She's been trained to pick up things and smack them at a canvas, and they call it animal art, but it is not the Mona Lisa. Yes?
Maddie made a good point. Taught by a human.
Yes. The animal was taught by a human, by an intelligent mind to put this and do this. So it's really at the direction of an intelligent mind. So humans create art, animals don't. Humans create architecture. Termites create architecture. Termites, I was just listening to some really cool things by an intelligent design guy who was talking about how the termites have a heat control thing. They grow their own food. They farm fungi, and so that they have a food source that they can take, and they don't even have to go out. They have a water runoff system, so they don't get flooded out, but yet they still have water available to the colony. They have all of these cool things. He went on about 5 or 6 more, but they designed some things. But you can tell that is a human design, right? There's an intelligence putting the architecture together on the left. By the way, that's the old Soviet buildings that in Moscow were the uniform and right way to do architecture. But then there's a different kind of architecture. What is this? Do you guys remember where this one's at? Who knows it? Sydney's Opera Hall, right? So why did they build it like this and not like the one on the left? Was there anything physically that it needed to have those pointy, roundy things? Termites, because they were like termites, building mounds. I would say sunlight. You said sunlight, and I heard termite. Okay, sunlight. Kyle says, and okay, there is some sunlight options to get in there, but they could have done that with a flat roof with skylights. But they chose to do it this way. I believe mostly for the beauty of it, for the majesty of it, for the interesting architecture that's there. Humans not only create architecture, but they do it in a way that for the creative part of it. I want to make something that people, when they look at that, will go, wow, that's amazing. So animals don't do that. Art, architecture, what else do humans do that are different? Yes?
Would it be so they can say that's very good?
Hey, so they can step back, and when they get that, go, wow, it was very good. As we talked about, that's God's creative, internal, what are his attributes? Why did he tell us that these things were very good? It appears to me because we, in his image, have that same thing. When we build something or make something or draw or come up with a piece of art, the artist can step back and look at that and say, I wouldn't change a thing. That's what I was trying to do. God did that. He has that same kind of an attribute. It was very good. I don't know if the architect of the Sydney Opera House said that or not, but any others that you can think of? What's different between you and an animal? God made you. What? We talk. Okay, so language. And written language specifically, because there are some dolphins who can back and forth, and there's a really cool, groundhogs. I just saw a thing, there was groundhogs, when they have a sentry that goes up and they make a squeak of some kind, and all the groundhogs pop down. In that squeak, supposedly, they've identified what type of a predator is coming. Is it a hawk, or is it a coyote or whatever? And how far or how fast you got to run. So supposedly there's a language that groundhog has in some way. Can you go get that checked out at the library and see what they wrote down of what their language is? They don't have any written language. Now, that doesn't mean that animals are dumb. I'm not saying that animals are dumb, but I'm saying there's a difference between humans and animals. How do we know that God created the heavens and the earth? It's written down for us. Exactly. That's how we know. Norm, are you right on this one with me?
Your whales, the songs of whales change from year to year.
Yep.
And dolphins actually have names, individual names for each dolphin.
So Norm's pointing out that there are languages in animal kingdoms. I saw a really cool one a number of years ago. So the pods up in Vancouver, 2 pods of orcas came together. They met. They don't meet very often, but they did. And they all lined up in this line. And then they swam together, and they intermixed and swam around each other. And then they swam past and lined up opposite side, facing each other again. It was like a dance. It was 2 pods meeting each other. It was cool. It was interesting. But it wasn't in the image of God. And that's the difference between us and animals. What's another one that you can think of, difference between us and animals? John?
The Bible says man has put eternity, or God has put eternity in our thoughts.
Eternity. Are animals going to last beyond this life? Is that what you're pointing out?
An animal doesn't think about what's going to happen in the next few minutes. They react.
So there's 2 parts to that. One is that we think about the distant past and how is that different than the present and how am I going to do that in the morning, in the future. Animals don't seem to do that. They've been looking for ways to try to, how's the plan going to be? Now, an Arctic tern has to kind of decide it's time to go to the north or to the south. So it's got to plan somehow, I'm going that way somewhere, I'm going to end up down that way. But that's not really a plan for the future. That's an instinct inside that tells it to do something, not that he's made a plan necessarily. Norm.
There's a survival mechanism in most animals, but security
Yep, and that's the second part of what John was talking about. So there's the recognition of time, but also that we are going to live longer than this physical life. When we're physically gone from this, whether we are taken up to be with the Lord and changed in a twinkling of an eye, or whether we pass away and wake up in Abraham's bosom or in heaven, whichever your view is of it now, that happens differently for humans. Now, how do we know that? Only way we know that is from the Bible. So we can't prove that humans are different in that way because we haven't seen that other side. Jesus has come back and told us what it's like. Lazarus came back and told us. But we know that from our historical evidence, not from something that we can prove right now. But one of the differences, we believe, is that we're made in the image of God and we go on forever. And science guys kind of put it down as more conscience. We have a conscious thought where they don't. So non-religious people see a difference in human thought and human idea of self than animals have. And they have some interesting things. Again, they're not proving Bible stuff. They're just showing, when animals generally look in a mirror, they don't say, that is me in the mirror. They don't have a concept in most cases. There's some that they're looking at now with certain monkey types that will recognize themselves and preen in front of a mirror or something. But as they're not planning based on who I am and what I'm going to do. All right. One last one I had. Humans create sound in certain ways. Here's the dots and dashes from Morse code. But birds can create sound too, right? And they can sing in different songs and communicate in some ways that way. But birds don't do that kind of music. Music for the sound of music, to enjoy the music. They're singing for a reason. They're out, singing about the sun, and maybe the sun came up, the rooster crows. But this is what humans do. Henry.
Did we mention emotion?
We did not mention emotions. What emotions were you thinking of that are different in humans than in animals?
Like crying and feeling angry.
So,
Those types.
anger and crying. The only reason I didn't put that one in there, Henry, is that I've done some really interesting reading about chimpanzees are the only other species that will go in groups of young men and young adult males and raid other things and anger. They seem to have had an anger issue in chimpanzees. In sadness, I've seen an elephant who lost a baby on that, and the entire herd surrounds this baby elephant and goes through these trumpeting things and appears to be mourning the loss of that. Yes?
But I think something that is different is humans have a conscious sense of morality.
Morality.
So not only, we may have similarity in emotions, but it's that preemptive moral thought.
The ought. I ought to do something. What's an animal supposed to do? If it kills its neighbor, is that wrong? It's an animal. That's what the law of the jungle is. There's no right or wrong for an animal to do that. There is a human right or wrong, whether we kill our offspring or not, as the new things coming around in the news are telling us. I did put up the written word. You guys got there faster than me. This was an example of the written word in different languages. Tim, you're pointing to somebody. Who am I missing? Oh, Debbie, sorry. Gratefulness. Where is there a gratefulness in, that's one of the emotions maybe that Henry was talking about that we don't see, and thankfulness, gratefulness. That is a good one. I'll have to look for that and see if I see any horses appearing grateful or flies appearing grateful in some way if I give them something. I don't know. Yes, Kyle?
Patiently.
Patience, okay. That's an interesting one. I've seen cats, though. We have had a cat who would just wait patiently for the whatever it is to come out of the bushes so he could jump. But patience was pretty good in that cat. All right, so is there anything else? Thank you for your input on that. If you can think of, this is one that I've had fun doing because we're looking at us versus the animals, but we're reminded every time we think of one, God made us in His image. So therefore, it reminds me I need to be thankful that God gave us these gifts and was merciful to us and sent His Son and all those other things. Yes, Roger.
But aren't we both subject to the laws of nature? We understand that we can avoid some of the things that happen in nature if we take precautions. Animals are subject to that, but they're also governed by that. And when it's time for them to cross the Serengeti, it's because there's something in nature that tells them it's time. And so it's imprinted in their genes or whatever it is that governs their instincts, that they make those trips. Birds go back to the same place and nest in the same pile of rocks or whatever. But they're both subject to God. We're subject to God with a deeper intelligence of understanding. They have a reaction to what God has planned.
And some people can devolve from what they should be doing and just go back to their basic instincts and just act like animals. But at least we have the capacity for greater than that. All right. Any more? Randy had another one?
I have a coworker who's a professed atheist / agnostic. Yet, if he was king for a day, he has a very strong sense of justice for certain people who do certain things. So even somebody who claims to not believe in God still has a sense of justice and a sense of some things are just not tolerated.
Justice and then morality from that. There's a right and a wrong. This is wrong. We should not, a just thing would be not to allow that. So he has a strong sense of justice, but believes we all just got it from the crowd. So it's a hard one to understand for themselves. They have a hard time giving an answer of why would there be morality? Oh, well, it's for the betterment of the tribe, and it's for the survival of the largest group if we're just, and that's kind of how they go with it, but not very fulfilling in its thought process. Yes, Roger.
I think to Randy's point, the Bible even tells us people that by nature became a law unto themselves because it ran along the same law as God, and so they were justified. So there is a natural, like Randy said, a function to know right. But is it your moral understanding, or is it something that looks wrong to you?
Good question. Yeah. We're now at the questions at the back of the first chapter, and rather than just, some of them were fill in the blanks, and so you can go and read those things and then go back and write them in yourself that match the correct days of creation or things. I wanted to point out a couple we just did one of question 4, what distinguishes men and women from animals, and we spent some time looking at that. But the other one that I wanted to look at were the thought questions at the end of end of the lesson 3. Give at least 2 reasons why you believe God is an eternal creator. After looking at that, if you've jotted some down or after thinking about some of the things, do you believe God's? If you don't believe God's the eternal creator, see me after class, all right? Because we'll have some more conversation. But if you do, why do you believe it? What is it that made the most sense to you? I mean, we've talked about some of them. What made the most sense to you? Anybody? So you all are non-believers that God created us. It's hard sometimes. That's why I wanted us to think about it and put a little thought into, why do I believe what I believe? Is this just something that my parents gave me, and so therefore when I get to this point where there's a crisis of faith, I'm going to say, I don't even know why I believe what I believe. Maybe I've been fooled all my life. Mary has something. So when we read the miracles, we can believe that God did that. There's a faith in what God said He did. Okay, I like that. Faith is this is the only thing we have is faith. Even evolutionists have faith of what happened earlier. Go ahead, Norm.
First cause, we do it when we're kids. We say who, if everything is created by God, He created God, and we realize we can't keep going back.
So Norm's think there must have been a first cause, so that's why I believe that there is an eternal creator, because there had to be a first cause of everything. And
we even do it as kids. You think Aristotle, that's fine, that he thought it up, but we do it as kids.
even as children, they can recognize that. Good point. All right. So anybody else have any why you believe it? Second thing, if while you're thinking about that one, why is it critical? Or is it critical to defend the literal historical record of Genesis 1? Ross?
I'm going to answer the first question.
Please do. First question.
I think the two most basic and answers, but they're the two that are biggest for me, are one, the Bible says it, and I do believe the Bible, and then two, just the fact that everything is, like everything we talk about, just the fact that there is all of this stuff, it doesn't make sense for there to be anything else but.
Good.
Those are two super basic reasons that they go.
So in the law, they have these two ways of proof. There are two levels of proof. More likely to have happened than not. More likely than not is one of their things. And then the other one is the beyond a shadow of a doubt or beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, in the preponderance of the evidence, when we start looking at some of these things, it's more reasonable for me, just outside of religious thought, to believe that there was a designer. And that's why, as I mentioned last week, there's a whole bunch of folks that are, as in dozens, I don't know them all, but I've seen lists of names of folks who were scientists first, who were atheist evolutionists, who started thinking about these things from the intelligent design perspective and then couldn't answer, well, how did life get here? There's not even close to the thought process of that. How did DNA look like it looked with this code within it with no code maker? That didn't make any sense to them. The fine-tuned universe, the things just at the right place. Norm and I spent some time talking yesterday about, well, some of those things might have just happened, but when you add all of the things together, it was enough that there are scientists who are now theists. They believe that there is a creator, a God of some kind, even if it didn't get them directly to Christianity. Many of them did. Then as they looked, well, if there's a God, which kind of God am I going to serve? And then they became Christians. In their theory of their outlook of worldview. But all of those things come from the Bible, has the most impact on me because it's an authoritative, I believe, who was the only one there when this was made? God. And if God tells us what he did, then I'm going to believe what he did. So if we start putting things in there, well, maybe it happened in different ways. Maybe it just took Brazilians of years longer, and maybe he just didn't. Well, then I start saying, I need to have faith that God did it the way he said he did it, because no one else is going to be able to prove any other difference. They have theories of why, but they're not going to be able to prove it because God did it this way. That's why it's important, I think, that we defend God made it in the way that he said he did, because it's going to help us in our faith that if we can believe that, when he says there's an afterlife, and this is all going to be out in a twinkling of an eye, and then we're going to have a new body, and what's going to happen, we can believe him there too. That's the future part of this. Henry.
You know, when you say that, you got to think about, we don't have the intelligence to understand who God is. We cannot decide how God is created himself. And so if we can't understand that, we can't understand how who the creator really is. So you have to believe in something that you don't quite understand.
So we can't fully understand it, but that doesn't mean we can't have faith that the creator who said he created us, we don't know how he did it, but we can believe that he did.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Henry. John?
Well, and I think we need to avoid being trapped in the box of thinking that we have to have an exact answer for our non-believing friends, because they too have a lot to prove from their side, and most of the time they're relying on the fact that given enough big numbers, they can produce a tiny result.
Right. Good point. We're going to hit that in our next lesson, and some of those things that they have a really hard time having any idea on. We're still now on the eternal creator, and Tim's pulling up my next one, and we're going to, as we're doing that, this is now page 29 of our lesson, and we are studying Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We can have faith that actually happened. In this author spent some time talking about a universal truth, an accepted truth, an axiom. This is just the way it is. And nobody really challenges that. And one of those was, out of nothing comes nothing. Do you know anybody who believes out of nothing comes something? I do. Some theoretical physicists believe that our universe was a multiverse that was popping in and out of existence. And then one of those that popped in and out of existence on this infinity number just happened to look just like ours. That's why it looked fine-tuned. There was just so many infinite numbers of them that when this one popped into existence, it had to have this number. And I'm going, really? You believe that all of this came out of nothing, this mathematical equation, and so therefore you now know it happened? I look at those folks and I go, wouldn't it just be easier to believe in God? Would you have to quit trying so hard if you believed multiverse? I've been looking at this multiverse now for the last couple of years going, they had to be taking some hallucinatory drugs when they came up with this one, because it just made no sense. All right, so everyone must admit, this author believes in page 29, everyone must admit that something has always existed. And as I mentioned, not everybody must admit that. That's not an axiom that everybody must, because some people don't. They believe we popped into existence. And we believe that, what do we believe? Has something always existed? God. The science community used to believe that matter used to always exist. It was a steady state theory. Far back as you could do, there were rocks flying around in the universe, and there were things going on, and as far back. Well, then what happened? We saw presently acting causes. Do we know any, by the way, where something came from nothing? Any presently acting cause? No? Okay. So they started looking at the universe and started seeing, when we're looking at the stars, they kind of seem to be all expanding out from something. If they're expanding out, when you go backwards and look back, they all seem to be pointing to a very close, actually happen to be very close to the Earth, which is kind of an interesting thing. Of all the places in the universe, it just happened to have started this looking back, right close to where we are. What does it imply if all of these things were coming back to this spot? That there was a beginning. And the atheist hated this. They kept trying to come up with ways not to have this happen, because if there was a beginning, what happened before the beginning? They have no answer. They don't have anything that begins before the physical world starts, before the physical universe. That's all they know. What do Christians believe happened before the Big Bang? God. I was looking at this. Was there anything else, any other beings who existed before the foundation of the world? Jesus. Were there any angels who longed to look into the things? I think there's a verse that talks about that the angels, before the foundation of the world, longed to look at this plan that God was planning. And I have it in here somewhere, but it's the concept of, I think there were angels that were around in the universe. But there was something that existed before the Big Bang in our worldview. So, yeah.
You're talking about a completely different realm. You're talking about a spiritual realm.
Yes.
You're talking about a physical realm.
Correct.
So, in the physical realm, there was nothing existing physically.
We believe.
Yes. Well, yes, you're right. But when you're talking about existing prior to that, from my point of view, is in a different realm. So the angels and God are outside of that realm.
So God being the first cause is the first cause of the physical universe, not the spiritual. He was already existing prior to that. And so, yes, this guy in this book, the author of this book, kind of casts some aspersions upon the Big Bang, and I'm going, I think that God made things in a certain way, and if I draw a picture, and I draw the picture and then I tear it up and throw it up into pieces and they now become more art, God can do whatever He wants to do. And if He started it all in one place, make it look like that, I don't know how He did it, but the implication of what their theory of the Big Bang is that there was a beginning, which fits very well with what God said He did in Genesis 1. So our view fits the science. Their view, they're worried about, because they don't know what happens prior to that, and so they start inventing these multiverses that come and popping in and out of existence. So, but this author says that out of disorder came an orderly universe. in their view, and that is one thing I would agree with him on. Yeah, if the Big Bang happened and it just swirled all out there and it just accidentally came together as clouds and planets and water and all that, that doesn't make any sense to me. I believe, like this author does, that God shaped that, took the clay and made what he needed to make out of it. So I don't believe it just accidentally happened. But if he started from that point, okay, I'll let him start from wherever he wants to start. This author then goes on to the definition of evolution, and the authors of the intelligent design movement often go to this point, and so I wanted to take a second and remind people that there's different things people mean when they say the word evolution. Darwin's finches had a quarter or an eighth of a millimeter or eighth of a meter, I don't remember what it was not very much, longer beaks that he could point to and say, aha, it must be when there was a drought. There was a change in these, his theory was there was a change in these beaks of these finches over time. Is that evolution? I would call it that evolution. Was God an evolutionist then? Did he use those changes to bring us about? Well, is that his nature, to bring about little changes over eons of time? Or was his nature, let there be light? I don't think that God used evolution, personally, I don't think God used evolution as his tool on that. That's Mike's view. There's a group of Christians who call themselves theistic evolutionists. And they say, well, I can marry both. I can say God did it, but he used evolution on that. Well, there's a bunch of things that don't quite fit with that. Change over time is one definition, though, of evolution. Another is an increasingly diverse species arriving from nothing, from a series of random mutations then, acting upon by natural selection, from the last universal common ancestor to all of the life that we see today, from the plants to the animals to all the species that are out there. That's Darwin's theory. He didn't even deal with the origin of life. He just dealt with the origin of species because he was trying to come up with something. How can we get all these species? Well, I'm going to ask, if he was standing here today, I would ask him, how can you get to, first of all, he's been disproven. I'll show you the study, even on the origin of the species. But on the origin of life, he didn't even have a thought. How do you get life from non-life? Nobody knows that. Ask a scientist today, they don't know. They don't. And this is where, when you watch some of the intelligent design ones on YouTube of a guy named James Tour, who's a professor and synthetic chemist who've been, for decades trying to build different nanobots and things like that in chemical process, and he just destroys the argument that this life came out of nothing. He just looks at him and says, you guys are crazy. You know that can't happen. Show me anywhere close to anything like this. And I see articles that say, we're just on the verge of creating life. And he looks at those articles and he says, one of them, he says, and when they said that, I fell out of my chair and I read it again and fell out of my chair again. He was so dumbfounded that these people would say that they were on the verge of creating life. And I'm bringing it up to you. So when your neighbor says, well, they're just about to create life from nothing anyway, so that's how you can believe it, you can look at them and say, no, they aren't even close, and let's look at it together. And you'll be able to find the things that show not even close to creating life from nothing, let alone getting it to go from the single last common ancestor to all of the millions of different species that we see today and the extinct ones that show up earlier, which is the next place I'm going. God made it this way. In his design, the things that he made went according to their kind. They didn't go into the next kind. I'm going to become a little bit different and a little bit different, like Darwin thought, a little bit different. And then, there's a new species. And then that one branched off into other ones and blah, 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 and we get this tree of life. That's what Darwin taught and believed, and our schools are teaching, said things are going to reproduce according to their kind in Genesis, right? In several different places. Plants in verse 12, water animals in verse 21, and land animals in verse 24. This is how animals are going to propagate. So we should be able to see, do they do this or not? Well, the father of modern genetics, Gregor Mendel, said that this happened, that plants produced after their own kind. They had little variations. but then they went back to their wild type. They didn't go, he was showing that plants only would go this far. They wouldn't go into another species, they would just revert back to their wild type. And the evolutionists didn't like that, so they ignored him for 65 years. But if God created this, what would this obviously look like 100 years later? Well, like that, of course. Does anybody disagree that that early dog that I went back and tried to find out, who does scientists say is the animal, the dog, with the longest evolutionary that they can think is the kind of the original dog? And this is the farthest, supposedly the top one, is the farthest back. That's what the first dog looked like, they think. Something like that. But then how did it get to this dog at the bottom? Or how did it get to this dog? Man, that dog you could ride like a horse. But are those dogs? Pretty obvious they're dogs. And if they physically could those two dogs mate? If we took the sperm and egg from two different dogs and put them together, could we get a dog? We would only get a dog. We wouldn't get a horse. We all know that. Every farmer knows that. Every evolutionist knows that. That things produce according to their kind. Yes, you can get variation within a kind. You can get those kinds of dogs or those kinds of dogs from that top kind of dog. But you're not going to get a cat or a horse or anything else other than a dog. It's just the way it works. And they'll try, and I've seen them try, just bend over backwards to come up with a way. Well, if you take them and you move them to a separate location so they can't intermix, and then there's a catastrophe that separates the two and creates a different environment and puts natural selective pressures on this one, well, of course it's going to be something different. No, still a dog. Still the same. So we don't have to believe, and the reason I'm bringing this up is we don't have to believe in Darwin. It's not been proven. In fact, God's way of one kind staying as that kind has been all of human existence. That's what happens. Here's one more that came up as I was looking at these things. How many have seen Neanderthals and early man going from knuckle dragging to partially to this one right? Hang on a second. I got too far on that one. I'm going to go back. Missing link. Got to missing link first. Is that time, Tim, for the second? First bell. Okay, I thought I heard a bell already. The missing link. I went to the missing link before that other one, but I'm going to show it to you now. This is what, how many of you have seen this or your kids have seen this in a textbook at their school? I saw it when I was going through school. I mean, it was, if it's not that drawing, it's one very similar to it. The only problem is they don't have those skeletons. This is artist rendering. Why and show you? Because they don't have complete skeletons. They have 6,000. I just looked at, oh, I think I got it. They have these different parts of skeletons. Yes, Norm?
You go back one, say you can tell by the skulls, like the third one
From the top?
that's supposed to be bent over.
This guy?
Yeah, the original drawing was in the Time magazine. It was called March of Progress. And the guy that drew it drew him gradually standing up. They're not supposed to be all standing up like that.
He invented that in his mind, didn't he? Because the fossils don't actually show whether you walk straight up or whether you went down. Now there's some things that they look for. These anthropologists look for, paleoanthropologists, they got all kinds of good names. But they're saying, aha, from that we know. And I'm going, no, you don't. You make a guess and you have an artist draw a drawing. You don't know whether this animal. Now, I think there's a whole bunch of, in this example, Homo erectus and Homo, I can't remember that one. Neanderthalis, sapiens, that's us. And then they got these other, Homo habilis, Homo africanus. They have all these names. And they put all these connections together. And as I'm looking at and studying those things, and I'm going, where's the bones for that? Oh, well, they got a fragment of a skull that they then have this model that they put together and then put back the fragments onto this model. It says, see, this is what it looked like. it must have walked upright. And I'm going, what? You would never do that with a piece of vase. You would get one piece of vase and say, aha, now I know what the vase looked like. You got one piece of the vase. You don't know what it looked like. Did it have a fluted lid or opening or not? You don't know. So they make it up. And they make it up because it gives them another way that they can put their name on something, what I think. They get their name on something that says, see, look, I've discovered Lucy. I've discovered this new thing. Most all the differences fit in a cardboard box is the thing I've seen. There's 6,000 different things, but most of them are from a couple of different ones, which I believe are extinct ape species. But on we go. Tomorrow, the next round, we'll get to the last couple of things that this author makes about differences in creation, and then we'll catch our couple of questions, and Dan will start his lesson number 2. So be prepared to finish this, and lesson